Hello, I'm Connor. How the f did we get here? Good girl, good girl. Right, let's get on with it. Let's give this a go. Today we're going to be looking at the Overton window, a phrase you've probably heard floating around in the ether of certainly left-wing media discourse in the last 6 to 12 months. The Overton window itself is frankly nothing special, but it's how it came to be weaponized by both the East and the West, which is going to be our focus today. The idea came from Joseph Overton, the director of the Mackinac Center for Public Policy. The definition on the Mackinac website states the following. The Overton window is a model for understanding how ideas in society change over time and influence politics. But the key idea here is actually in relation to politicians themselves. The political viability of an idea, and therefore its viability as potential policy, has more to do with the acceptability of that idea than anything to do with that politician's own beliefs. Again, from the centre. The Overton window doesn't describe everything about how politics works, but it does describe one key thing. Politicians will not support whatever policy they choose whenever they choose. Rather, they will only espouse policies that they believe do not hurt their electoral chances. And later in the same article, if your idea lies outside the window, trying to convince politicians to embrace it is an uphill climb. You'll likely need to start at the ground level, slowly building support for your idea, and then if it catches root there, politicians will eventually come on board. We can start to see here, in the very heart of the idea itself, the means by which it can be distorted and manipulated. At the bottom of the same article on that page on the Mackinac Center website, the Center has provided some handy FAQs for the curious reader. It's what you'd expect, until it isn't. Why, for example, did they feel the need to include this question? Can the Overton window be shifted by lies, distortions, or misunderstandings? Well, that feels important and not at all foreboding. The Centre then goes on to answer its question, helpfully saying, yes, but it's obviously wrong to intentionally disseminate misleading information. Thank for that. The Overton window reflects what society believes, which can be as easily influenced by truth and facts as it can be by inaccurate or deceptive information. Even mistakes can shift the window. The massive underestimate of Medicare costs probably contributed to the program's creation in the 1960s. The false belief that weapons of mass destruction would be found in Iraq contributed to support for that war. That's weird. Like two quite strange, disparate things to bring together and pick as examples of misinformation or disinformation or simple misunderstanding. I wonder what political movement is against federal government spending and foreign intervention, but crucially, not brave enough to call the reasons for entering past military disasters lies. I'm also pretty confident that enough time has passed since the Iraq War. We can agree. It was lies. The whole WMD thing, lies. Rumsfeld is dead. I checked. Cheney is 84. And George W. is a painter or a plasterer or some shit. You're safe. It was a lie. If you're feeling really daring, you might even say that it was an intentional dissemination of misleading information. But I'm pretty sure that won't come back again, and again, and again. Bye. And again, as a theme, reflecting not only the hypocrisy of the Mackinac Center specifically, but of the whole neoliberal project generally. Come on. Good girl. The perceptive amongst you might have guessed that the Mackinac Center describes itself as independent, otherwise known as libertarian. They are anti-union. They were anti-COVID lockdown, and they are anti-minimum wage. They are all those things because they believe that they are bad for business. As an aside, here's a legal case they brought against the Michigan Department for Health. You'll notice it's about the underreporting of deaths in care homes, not, in fact, about the efficacy of lockdowns. And even though they choose to make the link between the two without any evidence, it seems quite clear that they leapt at the opportunity to expose government ineptitude which caused the deaths of human beings in order to erode public trust in federal institutions in order to further their ideological goals. Cool! They also contributed to Project 2025 before being exposed and requesting that their name was removed from the contributors list. Very cool! So, why do we care about what this relatively small collection of free market freaks thinks? Because it's important to highlight the ironic flaw within the window, which is that once you name the window, teach people how to identify what falls within it and outside of it, you're also giving people the ammunition to shift it. The current director of the Mackinac Centre claims the first use of the window was actually to drum up business for the centre itself. The Mackinac Centre's purpose was to identify some of these ideas within the windows of possibility, but also the manipulation of the public to support ideas that may lie outside the window. They wanted a visual way to convince politicians and leaders within Michigan to work with them in order to further policy ideas. Already we're starting to see the irony of claiming that the window isn't a tool. Maybe this is new information to you, but politicians, at least the ones you've heard of, don't really believe in anything. They are creatures of their environment. And if they have a cause or a stance which has gained national attention, it's because the public was ready for those ideas to be platformed. Those ideas can be organic, but more often than not, they're the result of decades of media discourse discussing, dissecting, and sometimes championing them. A positive example might be marriage equality, and a negative example might be, I don't know, an ethno-supremacist state committing a genocide while the world watches on and does nothing. Even describing an idea which becomes policy as organic is a bit of a misnomer, as that will have been incubated in public and in private spaces. Again, a positive would be something like collective bargaining, and a negative might be political apathy. Think about two figures who've gained a lot of publicity on opposite ends of the political spectrum recently. We've got Nigel Farage on this side and Zoran Mamdani. Their popularity, the willingness of the public to engage with their ideas, elect them, is a reflection of the society from which they emerge. The fact that they emerge from more or less the same society is fascinating because it shows both the media machine at play and the organic, lived experiences of people. If we look at the available data from Google Analytics, we see that the public perception of the Overton window remains pretty low. I'm aware that this isn't like in-depth analysis like using Google search, but I think it illustrates a broader point, which is that the Overton window is a political theory. So why would people be searching for it on the internet? That is until a very sharp uptick in 2010. This leads us to another rogue character, Glenn Beck. For anyone under like 30, this guy was a huge name. It's actually worth noting that Beck's first TV gig was with CNN, where he floated around, but it was eventually poached by Fox, where he lasted 2 memorable years before just like endless controversy after controversy after controversy led advertisers to pull from his show. And that's kind of the end of things in US talk TV. Had to do some readjusting. The sun's gone out, so what can you do? Hello. I'm also going to sit up a bit more. Didn't like the way I was sitting. Glenn Beck is a lunatic. He's promoted some classic conspiracy theories like anti-Semitic George Soros puppet master stuff. That FEMA is going to start building concentration camps under Obama. He also settled a lawsuit with an innocent bystander of the Boston Marathon bombings, repeatedly claiming that he was an active participant. Beck's reason was that he is a Muslim. That's it. Beck is also kind of a harbinger of what's to come. His show is popular, and combined with his radio show and speaking tour, he had a large and devoted audience. In many ways, Beck's success with The Blaze after leaving Fox was kind of like a precursor for the success of something like The Daily Wire or, to a lesser extent, GB News. It was during Beck's tenure on Fox News that his first novel was published. The year was 2010. The novel's name, The Overton Window. The book itself is a political thriller, simultaneously described as having laughable prose and remaining at the top of bestseller lists for weeks and months, showing, once again, that underestimating these fuckers and their huge and devoted audience was a massive mistake. The book's plot revolves around the son of a PR mogul who falls in love with a woman who isn't quite what she seems. Also, Glenn Beck didn't write this. According to the Huffington Post, this guy wrote the book. He actually kind of wrote the opposite book and self-published it in 2005. Our hero is drugged and kidnapped by a public relations firm full of rich, powerful elitists who work for the government. They reveal that they've got loose nukes and a plan to frame the Patriot movement, repeal the Constitution, and create, quote, one world, one government, not of the people this time, but of the right people. Anyway, so let's call it Beck's book about a shadowy cabal of leftists working to undermine the Constitution is on the shelves and selling well. Within a few years, this very idea, liberal elites, progressivism as a cancer, undermining the family, the Overton window as a tool, has emerged amongst another group discussing the end of their civilization, the Russian ultra-conservatives. To be clear, I have no idea how this came to happen. For Glenn Beck, like, he's a Republican, he's in the libertarian wing. There's every chance that he would have heard of the concept of the Overton window, at least in passing. He's been in that circle. He lives in America. But to get from Beck to the Kremlin to Russian political bloggers, I have absolutely no idea how that happened. The Kremlin would, of course, like, be aware of, what gains traction that comes out of think tanks and lobbyists and all that sort of thing. But like, for it to be exactly the same as Glenn Beck's book is so weird. In January 2014, a LiveJournal article appeared titled Destruction Technology, in which its author, forgive my pronunciation, Evgeny Gorzaltson, writing under the name Zuhel, describes how progressives use this technology to attack the Russian people. For some additional context, Gorzaltson was a member of the Essence of Time movement, which is this crazy mix of like Soviet communism and nationalism and Marxism and conservatism. To like a mind used to like the Western political framework, it's just... In Gorzaltson's article, we see how this confused and painfully constructed belief system manifests into this paranoid hypothetical in which gay marriage is conflated with cannibalism. Quote, a universally acknowledged moral horror is made to appear natural, defanged, and encouraged by the end of the article. Astonishing because it's so fucking crazy, but also because of its immediate pickup and celebration within Russia. Progressivism was a Western cancer, and it was being actively deployed like a bioweapon by technology like the Overton window to destroy Russia. According to Natalia Anteleva, she first heard the concept from a Russian-backed rebel commander while fighting in Donetsk airport in 2014. He went on this great tirade about how the West is pushing its ideology in order to undermine traditional family values by conducting cultural warfare, as though lifted directly from the LiveJournal article. Antelava goes on to say in her article, link in the comments, Russian state media had become obsessed with this idea and claimed that it was proof in and of itself that the progressive West was working to undermine Russia. This hysterical position was constantly fed a rich diet of ultranationalism, paranoia, xenophobia by state-backed propagandists. This brings us rather inevitably to the rise of the alt-right and their entrenchment in the conservative movement in the West over the next decade. If we know the Russian state had adopted the idea of the Overton window, we can be almost certain that some of the major players in the Western alt-right will have done so too. If we go back to Zuhel's LiveJournal post, he provides a hypothetical of how progressives might win favor for a morally absent cause. Only what he describes rather prophetically is precisely how the current US president and his administration operate. And moreover, it's a tactic that we've seen being used incredibly effectively and increasingly by the far right in the West for the last 10 to 15 years. Look at Trump and his insane posturing on Greenland and Canada, and we begin to see how this shifting window might come into effect. Start by saying something wild and inflammatory, and then do something marginally less wild, and people will be less horrified. Say you're going to buy Greenland, then start deporting immigrants without due process. People will be angry at the second thing, very angry, but the window of acceptability has shifted. And now there will be enough people who find the idea tolerable that you can basically go about your business with impunity. It helps, of course, that you have multiple media machines who have spent the last couple of decades dehumanizing immigrants by calling them illegals or criminals. So you can then campaign on deporting all criminal illegal immigrants. Then, when in power, you can deport people by mistake, entrap them in their places of work or worship or their homes, literally kill them in detention. And you'll have supporters on side who believe in their hearts that every single person that you've done that to is a criminal, not worthy of due process, let alone compassion. Battery died mid-sentence there. I was on a roll. If you're after more of a UK flavour, you could, as a thought, have a government gutting the department that processes asylum claims, creating an insurmountable backlog, while, again, billionaire-owned media, in some cases the same billionaire, will do the dehumanizing for you. We've not gone so far as to suggest that immigrants eat pets, but we're very happy to make it a women and children safety issue. It's more of your classic racism here in the UK, kind of more in keeping with what you'd expect from a traditional colonial power. The result remains the same. A public primed to fear and hate the other, while shielding those with any real influence from any responsibility. The shift in the Overton window has moved so far towards the right, for the political class at least, that traditional leftist parties are making speeches like this.
Now, in a diverse nation like ours, and I celebrate that, these rules become even more important. Without them, we risk becoming an island of strangers, not a nation that walks forward together.
It could be said that the reason we're hearing more and more about the Overton window now is that we're firmly in the diagnostic stage of conversations about politics. It's a desperate time in much of the West. We are in the death spiral of a modern empire whose last moments are thrashing, violent, and unpredictable. The fallout is global. Conversations about how we got here might be too late. In my opinion, a large part of how we managed to get here is media illiteracy, but more so the active encouragement of that illiteracy by those with real power. No billionaire or millionaire politician wants you to think about what you read or listen to or watch. After several decades of generalized prosperity for the middle class, politicians ceded decisions to the whims of big business, and political apathy set in. It was encouraged. No politics at the dinner table, but also people who strike. Bin men, truck drivers, train drivers, postmen. Do you know how much they get paid? No. Well, some sentient ham on Sky News said it was twice what nurses make. The nurses are striking? Well, fuck them too. Now, eat your extra virgin olive oil hummus starter so we can watch Strictly in Question Time. I want to see the bring back hanging debate. This is all very doom gloom, but I want to leave my, at least first video, with some sense of hope. And I think we can find that if we go back to the Mackinac Centre's definition for the Overton window. The Overton window is a model for understanding how ideas in society change over time and influence politics. I think there is hope in this statement because the window is actually wider than it's ever been. In some respects, that's obviously terrifying, as we've seen in America and across fair parts of Europe with the rise in the far right. The unintended side effect of widening the window of possibility, or the Overton window, as we've been discussing, is that it widens across the whole political spectrum. If those with institutional power have chosen to platform people on the far right and their voices and their policies in order to maintain that power, what that leaves behind is a whole swath of people who are hurt by those policies and those ideas. The average person's life just gets so much materially worse on a day-to-day basis. Now, with the widened window of possibility, see and hear, perhaps for the first time in their lives, that there are different modes of being and ways of doing things. The other ideas that are now within the discourse suddenly become much more interesting. Within a widened window, they go from unacceptable to acceptable to feasible to maybe even absolutely necessary.